Hello everybody, welcome to a new episode of House of Tallysha with me, Isabel Tallysha-Soares. Today we are at the beach of Porto Novo, literally New Harbour or New Port. This is the western coast of Portugal facing the mighty Atlantic. Behind me, the mouth of the river Alcabrichel. And what you see here today on this bright sunny day on the beach with beachgoers and people basking in the sun was not such an idyllic place over 100 years ago, as we are actually on the landing ground that was used by a formidable army that came to fight a battle not so far from here. And I bring you here today because of this book, I from nothing, eu do nada. What does this beautiful setting has to do with the book and the story within its pages is what I am here to tell you about today. In the beginning of the 19th century, in the first decade of the 19th century, there was the Peninsular War, and this is an important place in that war and for this book. And I hope you can learn a little bit more about both I from nothing and Portuguese history and world history at that. We are in the interpretation center of the Battle of Vimeiro. Behind me is the actual battlefield. We are now 6 kilometers inland, so 6 kilometers far from Porto Novo, from the landing site of the British contingent, the British army, that would come here to fight a decisive battle in the Peninsular War when Portugal was occupied by Napoleonic forces. Behind me is the actual battleground of Vimeiro, the battle that took place on the 21st of August 1808. To give you a clearer perspective of what we are talking about, the sea is in that direction, so ahead of me, in front of me. So there is this British contingent coming. From there is another contingent led by the armies of Sir Arthur Wellesley, because the British were allied of the Portuguese. And the Portuguese and the English have been allies since the Treaty of Windsor was signed in 1386 between Richard III of England and King John I of Portugal. And from this direction, the French army commanded by Junot is coming from Torres Vedras. So the British and Portuguese forces that are coming in this direction will face the French armies on the gentle slopes behind me. And this is the Battle of Vimeiro. Why is it so important for the story or the history of I from nothing, eu do nada? Because eu do nada is not just a story, it's also part of history, of Portuguese history. And if it hadn't been for this battle and the French invasions, probably I wouldn't be here physically, and because I wouldn't exist, and this book would not certainly exist. So the French invasions took a heavy toll in Portugal, a country which has the long-lasting borders in the whole of Europe and one of the oldest borders in the world. And to have a foreign presence, a foreign armed presence here was not really what the Portuguese were used to. And so the accounts, the reports of all the pillaging and all the battles taking place and the French invading is still very much ingrained in the collective memory of the people living here in the western shores of Portugal, so near the sea. The actual farm, nothing, where my family comes from, is some 40 to 50 kilometers further inland. So they were in harm's way of the French army, and the farm was, of course, ravaged by the French army, and my family sought refuge in the forts that were built to protect the populations. So Vimeiro is an important moment for Portuguese history, an important moment also in the genesis of the story or history of my family, and hence so important in the story of I from nothing. Besides being a victory for the Portuguese and a victory in Portuguese history, the Battle of Vimeiro is also important in military terms. I've done some research, and this was the first time, or one of the first times, that shrapnel grenades were used. In my research, I could not find out exactly if this was the first time or one of the first times, because sources say both things. Anyway, this was at least the first major battle on which shrapnel grenades were used. And behind me there is this monument to commemorate the first centenary of the Battle of Vimeiro. So this was erected in 1908. And at the top you will have a representation of a shrapnel grenade, the symbol of the use of that piece of weaponry on this battle. And well, that's all for now. That's all for me and for this episode of House of Tallysha. I hope you have learned a little bit more about Portuguese history and about the clash that existed here in this Battle of Vimeiro between the forces of Sir Arthur Wellesley that rose to prominence later on as the Duke of Wellington, and who would eventually meet face to face the armies of Napoleon again to be victorious on the Battle of Waterloo. And of course, an episode that is very close to my heart because it has to do with the history of the people of nothing. If you like these sorts of contents, you can always subscribe the channel. As for me, Isabel Tallysha-Soares, it's always a pleasure to be here. I enjoy this enormously. I hope to see you next time here on House of Tallysha, because I will be waiting for you.